Hello, good morning. Thank you all for coming. So I'm going to start my talk with 3 questions. And the first one is I'm going to ask you, what are you skilled at? It can be anything. It can be your baking skills, your cooking skills, the jokes that make your kids laugh, fixing your cars. And then I'm going to ask you, which problem did you solve using this skill? And finally, would a novice have approached the problem the same way? When you fixed this problem using your skills, would a novice have used the same approach than you to fix this issue? And my guess is that the answer would be no, because in most cases what makes you an expert is not so much what you do, is how you do it. And so let's go back a little more to our example, and let's imagine this ggplot graph here, where we represent the miles per gallon on the x-axis and the displacement on the y-axis. It's the empty cars dataset, and we fit a polynomial curve on these points, and we color each point by the number of cylinders of the different cars. And this plot, it takes only actually 4 lines of code to write, so it could be considered easy. But if you were to ask yourself, what would a beginner need to know to actually write this line of code? And I'm just going to leave it a little bit of blank so you can think about this kind of, what the beginner will need to know to actually be able to write this. I came up with about 10 answers, but I'm sure there is a lot more. So for instance, why there are some words that have quotes and others that don't? What is this funny wiggly sign here? Why do we have AES here, but not here? Lots of things like that, that if you are familiar with ggplot seems very obvious, but as a beginner might take a lot to learn. And so on the path to going from getting from a novice to an expert, there is a lot of different skills and features that you can find along this path. When you are a novice, you just try to remember and understand the information that you are being given. Then you are doing as told. You are just copying the examples that the teacher or the instructor is giving you. And then you try to match the correct approach to the given problem. Then you need to integrate the different skills together to actually solve the problem you're trying to solve. And then as you become more and more familiar, then you need to try to understand the limitation of your own code, and then you can review other people's codes, and then you have an idea of how to optimize the code that you are writing or that other people are writing. But this path from novice to expert takes a lot of time and much longer than is normally available during a workshop. And to be able to sustain this effort of learning that can take many months or even years, you need to come up with strategies that sustain this learning. And so as an organization who is interested in teaching others how to write code, how can we help on this path from becoming an expert? So before I go more into the details, I'd like to step back a little bit and introduce you to the Carpentries if you're not familiar with this organization. It's a global community that develops and disseminates training resources in software and data science skills for researchers. The Carpentries is a newer name of the recent merger of 2 organizations. One, Software Carpentry, that was created in the early 2000s, and Data Carpentry that was created in 2014. So under the Carpentries is a new umbrella under which both of these organizations live and are being organized. Most of the training that we do is done as 2-day workshops where we take learners through a different set of tools and including the shell, Git, GitHub, and at least one of the main programming language being R or Python. And at least for the data carpentry workshop, we teach a lot more R workshop than Python workshops. Some of the characteristics of our organization is that all our lessons are open. Anyone can contribute to them, anyone can use them and teach from them. We have a strong culture of assessment where we assess our learners before the workshop, after the workshop, and 6 months after a workshop, and we try to evaluate the impact that the workshop has on their learnings and their skills. We put a lot of emphasis on diversity and inclusion. We have a task force and a person on staff whose job is to make sure that our lessons are suitable to be taught by a diverse group of learners. And we are a global community that is found all over the world. Since 2012, we have taught to more than 30,000 learners, over 1,300 workshops, all across the world. In the recent month, we have really had a push to teach more workshops in Africa, but everywhere in the world is represented. In terms of what we teach, for software carpentry, we tend to focus a lot on the skills to build good research software. And in data carpentry, we have different curricula that fit different kind of domains. So we have lessons for ecology called datasets and social science datasets that are tabular data. We also have a workshop on using genomic data, and in just a few weeks we will publish a set of lessons to work with geospatial data. So if we come back to this notion of going from beginners to experts, how do we teach and what kind of approach do we use? And I'd like to use an analogy of solving problems as a puzzle. And so when you are a novice, you can imagine that you're trying to solve a puzzle, but you don't really know what you're looking at the beginning, and so the pieces that you are trying to put together of blurry edges, so you don't really know how they fit together, and on top of this, what's actually on the pieces is also blurry, and so it's hard to figure out how things can fit together. And then once you get a little more confidence and you have practiced your skills, then each piece becomes a little more in focus, and so you can start to try to fit the pieces by trial and error and try to figure out how things fit together, but still the content of the pieces might be blurry, and so it's hard to figure out the big picture. Once you get more practice, you can get to have an idea of how the things fit together and have better integration on how these different things that you've learned can be put together to solve particular problems. And when you're an expert, you realize what you are trying to do, and that was you know the full picture of the problem, and you realize which subset it is, and so it's much easier to recall and fix the problem you are trying to do. So practically, what does it mean? So in our workshop, we use different teaching practices that try to cater to this growth trajectory from novice to expert. One of them is that will be related to how to show our learners the control of the pieces that they're working with, is live coding. All of our workshops are based on the instructor typing code in front of the room. It's very useful because it forces the instructor to slow down a lot when they are typing, and it also forces the learners to type along, so they get practice at actually typing the code that they're learning. And it also shows the learners how instructors make mistakes and how they can recover from the mistakes. So it's a very powerful way of teaching coding. If we talk about a little more different aspect of clarifying the content of the pieces of the puzzle, we have a lot of opportunities for learners to practice the skill that we are teaching. And so after each new concept that we introduce, we try to have an exercise where the learner can put into application the things that they are just learned. And we also try to design our lessons such that there is also exercises and challenges in our lessons where the learners can practice putting all the pieces together to get practice doing that. Another aspect is try to focus on the larger picture instead of the small details. And so we put a lot of emphasis on teaching the best practices instead of teaching technical skills. We spend a lot of time teaching other beginners how to get help, and so they can get helped. We try to build a strong narrative in our lesson such that the two-day workshop as a whole unit make sense, and there is a story that the learners can follow along to build their skills on, and they can get an idea where the piece of the puzzle they're working on is actually fitting in the big picture. And finally, we really try to use a reverse design approach to our lessons, where we try, when we design the lesson, we try to think about what is the end goal, what do we want the learners to leave the workshop with, and make sure that we teach the skills that are going to allow them to do that. So to go back to the first example of the ggplot, if making this plot is a learning objective of our lesson, we need to make sure that all the skills that are going to be needed to build these plots are going to be taught in our lessons. Again, I just wanted to reemphasize that obviously we can't make learners expert in just a two-day workshop, so we really try also to work with the motivation of the learners. And one of the first aspects of this is by providing a safe environment for our learners. We have a code of conduct that we enforce strictly, but makes learners feel confident to ask questions and are less, and it keeps them motivated by not having dismissive language by the instructors when they are struggling or don't understand one of the concepts that is being taught. Another is that we use domain-specific datasets so the learners can relate to the data that they're working with. It's something that they're familiar with, something that they will encounter in their research. We also spent a lot of time when we are designing the lessons to think about what is the most useful for the learners, what kind of skills they want to, what kind of skills they need to know to put them into practice as soon as they leave the workshop. And we try to celebrate success by encouraging our learners when they manage to achieve the tasks that we ask them to complete. A big aspect, an important aspect also of this is being able to sustain this learning, and we do this by providing an online community for learners. We have Slack channels, we have mailing lists that allows the learners to ask questions if they are stuck or want clarification when they are learning on their path for learning. And in the next few months, we are going to put a lot of emphasis on supporting local communities to create groups of learning practice where they can participants to workshop and instructors can gather and teach each other what they are learning and ask questions on their path of becoming an expert. If you're interested in getting involved with the Carpentries, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. It comes once every other week, and it's full information about what's happening in our community. If you go on our website at carpentries.org/community, we list all the different roles that are available in our community that you can join. You can follow us on Twitter, and I put below my contact information if you have any questions. Feel free to come get me while I'm here. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you. Yes? Okay, so the question was, when I was talking about motivation, do I need to motivate or convince the learners at a workshop to learn R or Python, or are they already motivated to learn these tools? Typically, in most cases, the learners at a workshop really want to learn these tools. They see the potential that they have, or they are working with very large data sets, and all of a sudden they need programming to be able to solve answers that they maybe could in the past answer with Excel. So the initial motivation is not usually an issue. It's more the long-term motivation to sustain the effort of learning to try to become more proficient. Yes?
You talked about the openness of the lessons, which is such a strength of the Carpentries. Do you have a strategy for how to manage a lot of difference of opinion about what the lessons should cover and still keeping it coherent?
Yes, that's a very good point. So the question was, given that the lessons are open, how do you manage possible conflicts in the opinions on what should be covered in the lessons? Overall, it's something that doesn't happen very often because it's, I guess, difficult to contribute to lessons, and so we don't get that many contributions beyond fixing a typo, fixing an error, but we would love to have more contributions. But what we've set up recently is to have a curriculum advisory committee for each set of lessons. So it's a group of people who have experience teaching and maintaining lessons in the Carpentries, who have the vision of what the lessons should be, and try to guide the kind of larger contribution that we may get from people outside.
Any further questions? Yes?
Yes.
How do you handle translation across like the languages if you're teaching all these different countries, in all these different countries? Is it all in English or?
So that's a good question. So the question is, how do we handle translations of the lessons, given that we are trying to teach globally? So right now we have the lessons only in English and Spanish, and we don't have a good technical way of doing this because it's pretty challenging. The tools that exist to manage translations are somewhat difficult to use for newcomers, and so it really increases the barrier to contribution, and so we have been reluctant to adopt them at this stage. But there have been a couple of people in Europe who are part of the community who are starting to develop tools that we could leverage to do that, and that create an interface on this more, on the tools that are already designed to manage translations, and that should make contribution easier. Okay.
Are there any further questions for Francois? No, then let's thank him again.
Thank you so much.